Welcome to the Crazy Cool Family Podcast with Don and Suzanne Manning.
A podcast where we share with you great insights about everything family from over 30 years of parenting 7 kids and over a decade of equipping parents through our Crazy Cool Family ministry.
So let us inspire and equip you to build your best family.
Are you looking for an encouraging book to read? We wrote a book called Crazy Cool Family. It's based on our 30-plus years of parenting experience and all God taught us about His heart for relationships. You want to read something engaging, funny, and that inspires you to love every person in your family? Our Crazy Cool Family book is just for you. Click the link in the show notes to purchase a copy today. Welcome to the Crazy Cool Family Podcast. Don here today. We're going to talk about men. We're going to talk about relationships with a new friend of mine. And Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here.
Yeah, so Mark Lubbock has a ministry called Gulf South Men. And Mark's been he's a pastor, a business owner. He's been doing men's ministry for many, many years. So we're talking about relationships in our podcast series. And really season 6 is a lot about relationships. And so I wanted to bring Mark on because Mark, how many men have you talked to in 30 years, you think?
Oh, thousands, literally thousands, probably tens of thousands.
Yeah, so he's been doing it. And just thank you, Mark, for doing men's ministry for a long time, being a pastor, serving the kingdom. But we're going to talk a lot today about a man and his relationship with God and his relationship with his kids and his home. And just, I want to get some insight from Mark. So if you're a husband, if you're a man, Mark's going to have some great experiences for you. If you're a wife, maybe, we get a lot of questions from wives. How do I get my husband more involved in the home? How do I engage my husband? Things like that. So a lot of different things we're going to go, but primarily around a man's relationship with home. And so first of all, just like I said, Mark, thanks for coming. And in your discussions with men, you focus on, like, a lot of times helping churches and organizations bring a man to a deeper relationship with God. Isn't that true? Isn't that kind of what you guys do?
Yeah, that's our sweet spot, if you will. We've got a footprint that expands beyond that. And, it might not be a bad idea to define why is it important to focus on God and why not just behaviors and choices, do's and don'ts.
Right.
And I can lay a real quick case for why people ought to consider this. Men want to be respected. They want to earn respect. They don't want to buy it. They want to earn it. And they want to have a purpose that has value. And so what they need is a standard or something to measure against. And the common way when you meet a new guy is, what do you do for a living, right? It's your employment. But men really want something more important than that. They want an identity that's worthy. And there is nothing that is more worthy, more challenging, or more motivating than the standards that God establishes for biblical manhood. When you introduce a man to the precepts of biblical manhood, they start to understand what a real man looks like, and they aspire to become that man. The next step, of course, is how do they do that? What's the context? Where do they learn how to become this real man? But by having that introduced into their life and into the household, it raises the standard and it creates a brand new culture. And so I wanted to take a moment just to talk about why that's important.
Well, and so what you were saying is that every man, and so, wives, if you're trying to connect with your husband, I think this is relevant, or men, if you're thinking about it, you said every man wants to have I think you said maybe have a purpose in life.
Absolutely.
We tend to put that into our jobs, but so many men, and after a while your job becomes it becomes too much, or it becomes like not what you really want to have value in. So you feel like, and you're talking to these thousands or tens of thousands of men, and almost every man you talk to says, I want to have a purpose in life. I want to have a value system.
Yeah. In fact, when you ask people in or out of the church, What's your purpose? Why are you here? Why do you exist? Almost nobody has a ready answer for that. And that, again, is because we don't have any cultural process that identifies that, helps men discover and claim it. Why am I made the way I happen to be? And who is it that I'm designed to become? We all believe that we will grow and become better as we get older. At least that's our expectation and desire. But what's the process? What's the guide, if you will, to deliver that promise or that hope?
And so when you look at it, so if we've got, again, men listening out there today, what is that process? What have you seen in dealing with thousands of men? What is that best pathway towards growing in in those biblical values?
As you started out, you were talking about relationships.
Yeah.
And something really interesting takes place when men have a common goal or a common value, common standard, is their relationship starts forming around that. It doesn't matter your cultural, your business, your economic, your family background, not even your age. You become through these standards more relational. And what a lot of times men are seeking is to have a meaningful relationship. Lone rangers are an exception, and there are very, very few men that are actually designed and called to be lone rangers. It's usually a defensive behavior to protect yourself from hurt or exposure. One of the things that I find out is that as men discover that there is something of value, there's a model to pursue, they start having what I would call a brotherhood. Now, what that becomes is a mutually encouraging peer group. And the peer group, again, extends beyond age and people background and where you live, even. So I find that guys who are pursuing this goal can go anywhere in the world. And when they meet another that is on that path, they've got an instant brother and they have something in common. They become more relational in that context. And so that's a really big part of the process is you're creating those relationships and the opportunity for men to belong to something they want to belong to.
So one of the things you would say for men is to examine their lives, and if they don't have what I would call godly relationships, then definitely one step for them to really start their journey. And, in our case, we're talking about their journey towards leading their family well and things like that. One of those things would be not only to journey towards reading my Bible, say, but also journeying towards godly men relationships, right?
Absolutely. And the reason that matters to men is it gives them a process to succeed. See, men don't want to fail. They want to be a good husband. They want to be a good employee or employer. They want to be a good father, a good parent or grandparent. And everything that they do stems from their understanding of what that looks like. When you have God in the middle and what you learn through the processes and the relationships of how to do this, their likelihood of succeeding is raised. Let's take family relationships, husband and wife, for example. Men do what they think is right, and they have a desired outcome. They just simply haven't been equipped and taught what the biblical values are. And I use this term because they work. You look at any secular study that talks about behaviors and things that succeed in a marriage relationship, they're all biblically founded, every one of them. I've looked at Pew Research, Gallup polls, I've looked at university studies, federal government studies, and the things that they identify that succeed in building a healthy family, every one of them have a biblical precept.
I want to explore something there, though, that you said, and I agree with what you're saying about the biblical precepts, but I want to go back a little bit because you talk to so many men, and I want to bring that context into the podcast. You said that men want to be good husbands and they want to be good fathers. They want to be good employers or employees. And so when you talk to men all over the country, really all over the world, you find that commonality there that men want to be good at what they do, right?
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely.
because a lot of times, the reason I ask that is because a lot of times, wives, the society will say, well, just, men are lazy. They don't care about family. They don't care about this or that or whatever. All they want to do is they're selfish. They're for themselves. I don't find that. And especially when it comes to when you really start talking to men. Now they may show certain things on the outside, but most men, and we're stereotyping here a little bit, but when you talk to them about, do you want to have a great relationship with your son or daughter? They 99.9% of them will tell me yes. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And and
Uh,
yet And yet, you'll ask them the next question, what's that relationship like? And they'll say, well, man, some of them will say it's good, but a lot of them will say it's really difficult or average, or I'm frustrated or whatever. Let me ask you this question. How does, when that man starts to have that relationship with God, you said he becomes more relational. How does that impact his relationship with his children?
I'll give you a quick little story. I won't mention the guy's name,
Yeah.
but he was a contractor, a business owner who did construction of a certain nature. And he had kind of a foul mouth. He had sons and grandsons working for him. And he would yell at them, tell them what to do. He would curse at them. He'd call them names if they didn't do things perfectly. And that was his style. And that's what he had learned from his grandparents and parents. That was the style that's what bosses did.
Yeah.
And that was the right way to do it. Fast forward a little bit, he began going to church, got involved in a men's group, and started studying and learning. And along the way, he learned that that wasn't the God's way of doing, God's plan. It wasn't showing respect. More importantly, he learned what love looked like. Love's an action. It's not a feeling, not an emotion. It doesn't happen. It's a choice. And he learned that men are wired to love through their behavior, their choices and actions. And he started applying that. He applied it baby steps. You have to learn gradually. First with his wife in the way that he related to her, and I'll give you some examples in a moment, but also the kids. And what happened one day, this was related by his wife to me, is the grandkids came up and pulled her aside one day and said, what happened to granddad? Did he have a stroke or something? Because he's so nice now. And he's considerate. He gives us breaks. He compliments us, and something happened to him. I don't know. He's not the same man again. This was the outcome. Now it was probably a couple of years of training and mentoring on what does a biblical man look like, but he changed. He also became a man of prayer and started learning how to lean on God and trust God and see it work. See, it's got to work. It's got to function. It can't just be an action you go through to check off a box and it does nothing. But as that happened, it encouraged him. And I'll take another sidestep here. His wife became his greatest encourager.
Mm-hmm.
She was very wounded, had a lot of things that she had to overcome because of his behavior, a lot of deep hurt. And she chose to take the high road. And every time that he did something she could legitimately affirm and encourage sincerely, she did. She became his great encourager. She didn't know this, but one day he came aside and he told me, he said, Mark, he said, there was a day I was really down, and I'll just be honest with you, I wanted to give up. I wanted to quit. I was going to quit. I was planning to quit. And in this case, he was just going to give up his faith walk.
Mm-hmm.
Going to give up, just turn from it. And his wife came in that morning and just out of the blue said, I don't think I've told you how proud I am of all the efforts. And I know it's not been easy. It's not been easy with me, and I'm sorry for that, but I am so proud of you. And he told me that was the pivotal moment in his faith walk, her encouragement. So it's a two-way street here, but the men need to initiate it. I'll take a second step here. I've got a bumper sticker here that I've created, and I teach my men how to do this. Now, I don't make them put it on their vehicle. A lot of guys don't enjoy
And by the
stickering
way,
up
for the listeners, it says I love my wife, and it's got a heart there. I heart my wife. That's the bumper sticker you're talking about.
That's correct. Yeah. And I see a lot of those around, by the way, in a lot of cities these days. But what's fascinating is people will stop either the wife or the husband, and they'll say something like, "Oh, I bet your wife made you put that on, didn't?"
Right.
And the guys are so proud to say, "Oh, no, no, I'm learning how to do this."
Right.
The family responds well to a father stepping up, and it's stepping up. It's hard work, but stepping up to become that man that they want to be and that the family yearns to have.
Yeah, that's awesome. So really, just a couple of things I think are coming out of that for me. One of them is that men, if you want to learn how to connect with your kids, learn how to connect with God,
Yeah,
because and that will you will start to learn things. There are things relationally you can do that some of the things we teach at Crazy Cool Family are awesome, but we always say that the best fathers and mothers are first sons and daughters of the King. That you if you're an angry person, one of the things I want to dive into in a minute is some of the obstacles men face. But if you'll start with that relationship with God, it will kind of grease the skids towards learning things that help
good
you.
point.
If you're an angry person, you're going to be an angry parent. If you're if you are a distant person, then you're going to be a distant parent. That's just kind of how it happens. But for I think one of the things I love for wives to hear in that is that hear from both of us, because we talk to a lot of men, that husbands do want to do well with their family. They do want to be successful, and some of that, and for husbands and wives, our encouragement of each other can really be impactful. And
Absolutely. And it can be, if there's not the right values and the right approach, you talked about some fun, things you can do to improve relationships. If the process is wrong, it creates a wedge and creates separation. So men can really be a great obstacle in the marriage and family by trying very hard to correct things they see need corrected. The value then of having relationships, peer relationships with God in the center, is men learn a better way.
yeah,
And
and
that's,
you
they're all
said
looking
that,
for something that works.
yeah, you've said that a lot too, and I think that's another thing for both men and women to hear is that men in particular, why, I think that women, again, this is a stereotype, it's not always true, but our wives are usually more relational, they're more connective, they're more intuitive. We just want to see a way for things to get better. We
Absolutely.
want to see a pathway. We want to see it's more linear, it's more logical in many ways. And again, not every man and every woman, please don't hear that. But I mean, but I do think that, if you can, and so if men can see a pathway to success towards winning the game or towards improving things like that, it definitely connects with them more, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Doing things together that the other person enjoys, choosing to do things the other person enjoys, whether it's your children or your spouse, is a big, big step. Men learn how to do that, and they take joy in seeing the pleasure of the other person, what's your wife or your children. You
Yeah.
see them having fun in something that you've initiated or you're supporting, that's rewarding to men.
So,
Uh,
Mark, when you're talking to men, what do you think are the obstacles? Like, what do you think are the issues that are they're facing that keeps them from connecting with their homes or is damaging the relationships in their homes? What are some of those things that you're seeing?
That's pretty key. One of the things is you have a limited tool set. Somebody once said that if all you have is a hammer, everything you look at's a nail, right?
All right.
And the value of the kingdom, in other words, the whole church, involves a lot of diversity, and that means that everybody has a place and a role. So the men have a place by God's design to fit in, as do the wife and the children and so forth. So learning what your role looks like can help overcome some of the obstacles. You mentioned anger a little bit earlier. Anger is a huge obstacle, or reacting, and we have reflexes that we fall back on that have to be retrained. And what comes out of the mouth, according to the Bible, is from the abundance of the heart. One of the first things we teach men to do is, what does it look like to have an honest to goodness relationship with Jesus and God?
Mhm.
That becomes a pathway to putting some love in your heart. And the love will displace. Light casts out darkness. So learning how to receive love from God, what does love look like from God, will begin to push out that anger. And that becomes, it removes an obstacle, but it also gives you something to give to other people. I can't give you something I don't possess. The concept fathered by God means that no, irrespective of what kind of fathering an individual had, as they allow God to become a father figure, and this is through engagements, through learning in small groups, through Bible study, through prayer. But as men learn that, they get a broader tool set, and they're not limited to just a hammer, just reacting in anger, or this reflexive falling back on old behavior. They're learning new tools and new behavior. And that has to be practiced, by the way. You know, you can give me a book on chemistry, and I guarantee you, without some hands on, I'm going to be dangerous.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that tool set. One of the things I've been working on lately is that men and also when the men come into family situations, most of them have never done it before.
Yeah,
They're not. They've never been trained in it. They're not. So if you think about, you're in men. If you're listening to this, if you're you're almost like think about the old school. Back in the old days, you were an apprentice that became a master craftsman.
good
So,
illustration.
so you think about how an apprentice did that. He had to do two things. One of them, he had to gain tools over time. So, he may be using the master craftsman's tools for a while, but eventually he would, you think about it today, you start out with a inexpensive drill, but now you have a very expensive, powerful drill. You have a certain saw, and men love to gain tools for their tool shed. But some men just go to Home Depot and buy all the tools, and they don't ever use them. They don't ever become the craftsman. So like you were saying, you've actually got to use the tools as well. But when you have both, you become this master craftsman. You become the ability to do a lot of things. And so often, I'm not a handyman, but I go to do a project and I don't have the tool. And so I go hire a craftsman in because they've got the tools and the experience, but we can't do that with family. We have to gain it ourselves. And so it's about, I love your analogy of tools, because then they bring in the tools, they learn how to use them, and it happens literally over time to become an amazing father and husband in the home.
Amen. And you were asking about obstacles. One of the obstacles is men don't know where to go. Where do you find these tools? Where
Mm-hmm.
do you find the better way? What's the process? We used to have a family arrangement where the grandparents were accessible and were involved in the life of the parents and the grandchildren. And you picture the image of a grandfather taking a child out fishing or carving, or letting the child work alongside them in the household repair or the shop. And those days don't exist largely. But what we can do to augment or to reintroduce that, and it goes back to peer groups, is you can have friends, right? Mentors of all different ages, people involved in your life who are better at some things than you are. You not only learn from them, but by doing things together, you can create an atmosphere where the children, the wives, and the families benefit from that. Also, again, there are groups like Crazy Cool Dads that have a process, right? And you have a tool set. And introducing men, churches, organizations, I tell you, one of the greatest untapped places for potential growth is the workplace. We all interact with people at work, irrespective of the type of responsibility we have. And to create something that would be workplace friendly, where you can share ideas, maybe over lunch or coffee or breakfast, not a bad idea. A happy, well familyed employee is going to be more productive than a bitter, lonely, lone wolf employee, right?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into when you have a men's ministry, and so a lot of times the guys that are listening to this podcast are Christian dads that are active in their families, and they're here to learn, but they're involved at work with some men who maybe are not as interested, and certainly not going to church, as we were talking about before the podcast. When you see a man like that, and again, we're talking relationships, and that man. One of the things to learn is that man or woman. And this can be men or women in the workplace, but we're talking about men because you have a men's ministry. But when you're connecting with coworkers, one of the great things to connect with is their relationship with their children, right? Because, like you say, they
Yeah.
all want it. How do you advise men to connect with other men in the workplace?
One of the greatest examples we have is watching Jesus and how he recruited, interacted, and mentored people. And he went to where they happened to be and met them in their place of comfort, right? So he went to the lake and met the fishermen at work fishing, right? And he didn't drag them into the synagogue or into the temple, to teach them while sitting on the throne. He just walked out and met them. The concept here then is to meet people where they happen to be and not to try to drag them to where you think they ought to be.
Yeah.
And in practicality, what that could look like is in any kind of a social activity or a fun activity. So think about work and think about having a barbecue or a cookout where everybody's invited to come bring their families. And there's just something very influential when you see somebody that you respect who is very casual and natural about their relationship with God. They're
Hmm.
not embarrassed.
Mhm.
They're not pushing it. It's just a normal part of their life. And it becomes even more impressive if it seems to be part of the family life. Again, it's not something that they're holding a Bible up or they're making a big deal. It's just a natural part of their life. And so when you create I call it an entry point or a doorway by meeting people in an environment where they sit and they're comfortable. It could be a social activity, could be a barbecue, could be taking folks out to the race, concert, going out to the park, flying kites, fishing, whatever. But you create those opportunities and you'd introduce an appropriate element of your faith. And that might just be something as simple as, hey guys, getting ready to eat. Anybody mind if I offer a blessing? And most people say, yeah, it's okay. And she offered, you don't give this great thee, thou type of a prayer, but you just say, hey, God, it's good to get together here. And by the way, anybody have anything going on you need a prayer for? Make it accessible and not churchy or religious. And that levels the playing field. It's just a natural relationship. God's my dad. I'm going to talk to him. Anything you want me to tell him. Um, but being intentional to create those. So as a parent, both husbands and wives, parents can create those opportunities for other parents where you can create, for example, my wife and I are going to create a little small neighborhood dinner where we're going to invite the neighbors immediately around us to come over to our house. Children are welcome. They'll see our faith, but that's not the centerpiece. It's going to be about having fun with each other and getting to know each other. So we'll ask people, tell me your story. Tell me a little bit about a great memory. More interested in the individual. That builds relationship, credibility. And when they see you acting as though God is important, they start to notice. And when they look at your life, see you're far from perfect, but that it's working, it's making a difference. And
Mhm.
more importantly, your family has bought into that. That opens up a door.
Yeah, and I think, and also, I just want to relate this. This is such a good podcast, just a variety of things that really impact men and the way they impact their homes. I think it's the best thing we did in our family too, is that we decided to just be transparent with our kids, share our faith with them, not try to be perfect, just really share, what was going on, good and bad. And I think our kids saw that, my daughter in our book, my oldest daughter in our book, Crazy Cool Family, says, the Holy Spirit wasn't some crazy ghost that we never saw. It was hidden in the room somewhere. It was a real person that we talked about, and God was real. And we talked about God as a real person and a real relationship. And that's what people are attracted to. So often people aren't attracted to knowledge. They're not attracted to self-righteousness. And that's true in the workplace and in our families. They're attracted to people who are, how many times do you hear somebody say, that guy's he's really real. You can really talk to him. He's really down to earth. He'll listen to you or whatever. I mean, just so many things that attract people to other people. It's not how much knowledge we have. It's how real we are and how real our God is.
That is so important. There are 8 words you will hear frequently out of my mouth today that you would never, ever, ever have heard of before I became a Christian. And the first one is, I'm sorry. And I
Mhm.
will be very quick to say that, which means I'm accepting responsibility, right? And another 3 words, this 8 altogether, I was wrong.
Mhm.
I'll admit that. And please forgive me. The words, when you add them together, become part of a behavior of a Christian who uses a Christian way of redemption, if you will, or correcting something you screwed up on. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I screwed up. I did. But here's how I'm going to address that and respond to that. Is I'm going to take responsibility, and anything that wounded you or hurt you or how it impacted you, I am sorry, and I want to make it right. When people see a Christian do that, all of a sudden that faith takes on an entirely different perspective.
Yeah, so true, so true. Well, so let me last question for you, Mark, and let's explore this one a little bit because this is where your sweet spot is. How have you seen a man's involvement in men's ministry help him grow in his faith and transform his life?
That's for me is the key, and that has become my passion. What I've learned is that as men start learning a a path and a process that works for them, they become eager to get more and more of it because it brings its own reward. There are more resources available today, really, really good resources, than in the history of planet Earth. The challenge is men don't know about these resources, and even if they did, they need somebody to show them how to apply that. And what I've found through experience is the church, for example, has a great desire for that, but the church staff and budget and process isn't scaled to do a great job. The plan always really for the church was for the whole kingdom to come together, the whole family. And so what I do with my ministry is we help introduce interested people, interested churches to the right resource. We do what we call best practice. For example, Crazy Cool Dads and the new manual that you're coming out with is something that we would heavily promote because it gives a plan and a process. There's an action step here that helps take a man from here and advance him down the conveyor belt.
Hmm.
And it's something men can get their hands around, or a church or an organization, or even a business. It's fascinating that businesses that have small study groups tend to have a better work atmosphere. And it's not a study group part of the business, it's one that the business permits that's aside. So it's not mandated, right? So going back to your question again, then, what we do as a ministry is we create resources that we haven't found to exist yet, but we also marry really good tools and resources with the opportunity. I've got a group of guys who are not, they're starting their journey to become a Christian and they don't know anything from anything. So
Right.
we're not going to flood them with Bible verses, etc. We're going to bring them into a small group where they build relationships and trust. And then we're going to take a topic, bring a good resource in for that topic, and pursue it together where everybody discusses it. So it's
Mhm.
not an expert force feeding somebody, but it's mutually growing together. Uh,
Right.
so I don't
Good.
know if that addressed your question
No,
or
that's
not.
good. I mean, I think that one of the things I would love for men to get out of this is uh, somehow connecting with other men. What are those pathways in your life? And like you said, there's a lot of resources out there. There's even ways to connect with men online, but hopefully your church has a way to do that. Like, our church has men's circles. And so we have circle groups and we talk about the message every week. And and there's something about being consistently with men over time, Christian men, godly men. It doesn't have to be where you have, and even mentors and people like that, but just other men that if you're, it just helps you grow in your faith. And that growth, like you're saying, happens over months and years, not days and weeks.
Absolutely. In fact, studies have shown that if men form relationships with six or more people at church, they're more likely to attend regularly and faithfully. Beyond that, men who don't attend church and have no interest in church, if you have a regular activity outside that they become part of, they want to follow that peer group. And if that peer group happens to go to church, they'll go to church because of the relationship. The key is consistency and purpose. There is a place for the coffee group or the breakfast group that just meet because they like the fellowship. There's a place for that. But men aren't called to that. But if there's a group that meets that has a defined purpose and they stick with it, there's a start and an end. It doesn't go on forever. Men are very, very likely to plug into that, and they grow the quickest in that environment.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, Mark, thanks for your time. I love it that we've really explored. And wives, I know this has been a men-focused deal, but I hope you've gotten some insight, wives, into like how to connect with your husband and really what he's thinking about, how to motivate him. So often we hear the wives say, you know, my husband's just not motivated about God or family. And there's truth in that. Well, like you were saying with that wife who encouraged their husband, so often you have a great voice that can help encourage your husband towards greater depths of faith just by being encouraging in that instead of nagging or critical. And so, just encourage both sides, the husband and the wife, to take things from this and to step into more and more of because, that's what it takes to build a great family. It's the relationships, starting with God, then to the marriage, and then to the kids. And then you start to see amazing families develop, which is our heart at Crazy Cool Family. So, yeah, Mark, anything you want to tell them about connecting with your ministry?
Absolutely. Gulf South Men, like the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf South Men is a hub. We have many arms there, but we are a connective ministry. GulfSouthMen.org is our website, and we welcome input, we welcome questions, and what we try to do is help resource people and identify good resources. We like to partner with good resources like Crazy Cool Dads and to share that out with other people. And we have a very, very broad footprint, really with the best practices in building good relationships. And that's important, by the way, because the behavior of men influences the entire world and outcome of kids. All the studies and secular reports show that the better the man behaves in following godly principles, the better health of the family and the future outcome of the family and the kids. So there's value in pursuing that and investing in it.
So dads, you're important, is what he's saying. So
absolutely.
And very critical. You're not called father for nothing, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, Mark, thanks again. And, thank you so much for your wisdom with men, and thanks for your ministry to men. And please, you guys check out their website, their resources, and also just check out your men's ministry at your church. If not, man, see if you can start forming one, because getting men together and working together through life is so critical to helping us just fulfill what our desires are. That's what I love. I'll kind of end where we started. Men want to be good dads. Men want to be good husbands, good employees, good employers, good men. It's not that we don't want to. Sometimes we need that. We need the tools and to use those tools and figure out how to use them. And so Mark's got a lot of resources for that, and so do your churches as well. So enjoyed your time with you, Mark. Thanks for your time. And as always, parents, go be crazy. CrazyCoolFamily.com.